The desert stretched endlessly under the scorching sun, its golden sand dunes shifting like ocean waves in the relentless wind. Captain Sarah Mitchell wiped the sweat from her forehead as she studied the satellite images spread across the makeshift table in the command tent. The photos showed nothing but barren landscape, but somewhere in that vast emptiness, 6 Navy SEALs were fighting for their lives. Sarah had been stationed at Forward Operating Base Alpha for 8 months, serving as a liaison officer between Special Operations Units and Intelligence Divisions. Her background in desert warfare and her fluency in 3 Middle Eastern languages made her invaluable in this remote outpost. But nothing had prepared her for the urgency of this mission. The radio crackled to life, breaking the tense silence. Base Alpha, this is Phoenix Team. We have confirmation of enemy movement, approximately 15 clicks northeast of target location. The package is still hot. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Colonel James Rodriguez, the base commander whose weathered face showed the strain of too many sleepless nights. Sarah knew the coded language well. The package referred to Team Bravo, a 6-man SEAL unit that had been conducting reconnaissance deep in enemy territory. Their mission was supposed to last 48 hours. It had been 72 hours since their last communication. 3 days earlier, Team Bravo had infiltrated a suspected weapons cache location, following intelligence about a major arms deal scheduled to take place in the remote desert region. The area was known to be controlled by a militant group that had been responsible for numerous attacks on coalition forces. The SEALs were equipped with the latest technology and had years of experience between them, but the desert was an unforgiving environment where even the most skilled operators could find themselves in deadly situations. Sarah remembered the briefing clearly. Staff Sergeant Mike "Tank" Thompson led the team, a mountain of a man with 15 years of special operations experience. Petty Officer First Class David Chen was their communications specialist, known for his ability to establish contact under the most challenging conditions. Hospital Corpsman Second Class Marcus Williams served as their medic, while Petty Officer Second Class Jake Morrison was their explosive ordnance specialist. The team was rounded out by Petty Officer Third Class Alex Rodriguez and Seaman First Class Tommy Jackson, both skilled marksmen and tactical operators. The mission had started smoothly. Team Bravo had successfully infiltrated the target area under cover of darkness, moving through the desert using advanced night vision equipment. They had located the suspected weapons cache and confirmed the presence of significant military hardware, including surface-to-air missiles and improvised explosive devices. But as they prepared to extract, their world turned upside down. Sarah reviewed the timeline again, searching for any detail that might help locate the missing team. At 0347 hours local time, Team Bravo had transmitted their final report, confirming the weapons cache and requesting immediate extraction. The helicopter was en route when Chen's voice came over the radio again. This time, urgent and strained. Base Alpha. We have multiple vehicles approaching from the south. Count 6. No, 8 vehicles. Were compromised. Initiating evasion protocols. That was the last anyone had heard from them. The search and rescue operation had begun immediately. But the desert presented unique challenges. Sandstorms had reduced visibility to near zero for the past 2 days, grounding all aircraft and making ground operations extremely dangerous. Satellite coverage was limited due to cloud cover from the unusual weather system that had moved through the region. Even the most advanced thermal imaging equipment was useless in the current conditions. Sarah studied the topographical maps, noting every cave system, rocky outcropping, and dried riverbed in a 50-mile radius around Team Bravo's last known position. The area was riddled with natural hiding places, but it was also patrolled by hostile forces who knew the terrain better than any outsider ever could. "Any word from the drones?" she asked Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, the intelligence analyst who had been working alongside her since the operation began. "Negative," Santos replied, shaking her head. "The sand is still too thick. We're flying blind until this weather clears." She pointed to the meteorological report on her screen. "The good news is that the storm system is finally moving east. We should have clear skies by midnight." Midnight. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine despite the oppressive heat in the tent. Something about that timing felt significant, though she couldn't explain why. She had learned to trust her instincts over the years. And right now, they were telling her that midnight would be crucial. What about ground assets? Sarah asked, referring to the network of local informants and friendly contacts that intelligence units cultivated in the region. We've got 3 reliable sources in the area, Santos replied, pulling up a different screen. Abdul Hassan runs a trading post about 20 miles from the target zone. He's been cooperative in the past, but he's gone dark since yesterday. Could be he's lying low until the situation stabilizes. Sarah nodded. In this part of the world, survival often meant knowing when to become invisible. Local civilians had learned to disappear at the first sign of military activity, waiting for the storm to pass before resuming their normal lives. The tent flap opened, and Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez entered, his uniform stained with sand and sweat. "Any progress?" he asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "The weather's clearing," Sarah reported. "We'll have full drone coverage by midnight. I recommend we prep a ground team for immediate deployment as soon as we get a fix on their location." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "I've already got 2 Humvees on standby with full combat loads. Problem is, we're dealing with at least 8 enemy vehicles, possibly more by now. They've had 3 days to bring in reinforcements." He paused, studying the map. "If our guys are still alive, they're either captured or hiding somewhere in this maze of canyons and caves." Sarah traced her finger along a series of narrow canyons that cut through the landscape like scars. "If I were in their position, I'd head for high ground with multiple escape routes, somewhere I could see the enemy coming but still have options for getting out." "That's a lot of territory to cover," Rodriguez pointed out. "Even with full air support, it could take days to search every possible hiding spot." "We don't have days," Sarah said quietly. "If they're captured, every hour increases the likelihood they'll be moved to a more secure location. If they're hiding, they're running out of water and medical supplies." The reality of the situation hung heavy in the air. Desert survival was measured in hours, not days. Even highly trained special operations forces couldn't survive indefinitely without water and shelter from the brutal heat. Santos looked up from her computer screen. "I'm getting reports of vehicle movement from our observation post on Hill 247. Multiple contacts heading northeast toward Grid Square Papa 7. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Grid Square Papa 7 was adjacent to the area where Team Bravo had last been seen. How many vehicles? How many vehicles? At least 6, possibly more. They're moving in a convoy formation, maintaining tactical spacing. Santos enhanced the thermal image on her screen. "Based on the heat signatures, I'd say we're looking at pickup trucks with mounted weapons, possibly some heavier vehicles mixed in." Rodriguez leaned over the screen. "That's not a patrol. That's a search party." The implications were clear to everyone in the tent. The enemy was actively hunting for Team Bravo, which meant the SEALs were still alive and free. But it also meant they were running out of places to hide. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. "Sir, I request permission to conduct a solo reconnaissance mission. I can move faster alone, and I know this terrain better than anyone else on the base." Rodriguez stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. "Absolutely not. I'm not sending a single operator into that hornet's nest. With respect, sir. A full team would be spotted immediately. One person on foot, moving at night, has a chance of getting close enough to make contact." Sarah pulled out a detailed map and pointed to a series of coordinates. "These are traditional water sources used by Bedouin tribes. If our guys are smart, and we know they are, they'll be somewhere near water." "It's suicide," Rodriguez said flatly. "It's their only chance," Sarah countered. "By the time we organize a full rescue operation, they'll either be dead or long gone." Santos looked up from her communications equipment. "Ma'am, we're getting scattered radio traffic on enemy frequencies. They're coordinating something big for tonight. Multiple references to the Americans and orders to bring them back alive." The tent fell silent except for the hum of electronic equipment and the distant sound of generators. Sarah knew that everyone was thinking the same thing. Team Bravo was out of time. "There's something else," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was about to propose. "I've been studying the patterns of enemy movement in this region for months. They avoid certain areas after dark, places they consider cursed or haunted. If I can reach one of those locations, I might be able to establish a safe communications point." Rodriguez studied her carefully. "What aren't you telling me?" Sarah hesitated, knowing that her next words would either convince him or end the conversation entirely. 3 months ago, I made contact with a local guide named Amir. He helped us locate an IED factory that we later destroyed. He disappeared after that mission, but he left me with detailed information about hidden routes through this desert. Routes that the enemy doesn't know about. And you think this Amir character might still be in the area? I think he might be our only chance of finding Team Bravo before the enemy does." Rodriguez walked to the tent opening and stared out at the darkening sky. The sandstorm was indeed beginning to clear, revealing the first stars of evening. When he turned back, his expression was grim but determined. "You'll have 4 hours," he said finally. "Midnight to 0. 40. 0. If you're not back by then, I'm sending in the cavalry. Enemy forces or no enemy forces." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and terror. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet," Rodriguez replied. "If this goes wrong, we'll lose 7 people instead of 6. As Sarah began preparing her equipment, she couldn't shake the feeling that this mission would test everything she had learned about survival, courage, and the bonds that connected soldiers in the field. The desert kept its secrets well. But tonight, she was determined to unlock at least one of them. The clock on the wall showed 2,147 hours. In just over 2 hours, she would begin a journey into the heart of enemy territory. Armed with nothing but her training, her instincts, and a desperate hope that 6 brave men were still alive somewhere in the vast darkness of the desert. Outside, the wind was finally beginning to calm, and the stars were becoming visible through the clearing dust. Sarah checked her equipment one final time and tried not to think about all the ways this mission could go wrong. Instead, she focused on the faces of Team Bravo, 6 men who had trusted their lives to the mission and who deserved every chance at making it home. The desert night was coming, and with it, the most dangerous mission of Sarah's military career. The digital clock in the command tent glowed 2,359 hours when Sarah Mitchell stepped into the desert night. The air was still warm from the day's heat, but she could feel the temperature beginning to drop as the clear sky allowed the warmth to escape into space. She moved silently through the outer perimeter of Forward Operating Base Alpha, her black tactical gear helping her blend into the shadows. Sarah had spent the previous hour making final preparations that could mean the difference between life and death. Her backpack contained enough water for 24 hours, high-energy nutrition bars, a compact medical kit, night vision equipment, and a satellite communication device that would allow her to maintain contact with base. Her sidearm was loaded with a full magazine plus 2 spares, and she carried a suppressed carbine with specialized ammunition designed for desert operations. The most important items she carried weren't weapons or equipment, but information. Folded carefully in a waterproof pouch were detailed maps that Amir had provided months earlier, showing hidden trails, water sources, and safe zones that weren't marked on any official military charts. These maps represented generations of desert knowledge, passed down through Bedouin families who had survived in this harsh environment for centuries. As Sarah moved away from the base, she activated her night vision equipment and began following the first waypoint on Amir's map. The landscape looked completely different in the green glow of the night vision, with familiar landmarks transformed into alien shapes. But she had studied these routes extensively during her free time, memorizing every detail in case she ever needed to use them. The first mile passed without incident. Sarah maintained a steady pace, stopping every few minutes to listen for sounds that didn't belong in the desert night. The silence was almost complete, broken only by the distant call of a night bird and the whisper of sand moving in the gentle breeze. At the second waypoint, Sarah encountered her first sign that she wasn't alone in the desert. Fresh tire tracks crossed the path she was following, still visible despite the recent sandstorm. She knelt beside the tracks and examined them carefully. The tread pattern was consistent with the type of vehicles used by the militant groups operating in this region, and the tracks were no more than a few hours old. Sarah keyed her radio and spoke quietly into the microphone. Base Alpha. This is midnight. I have vehicle sign at waypoint 2. Multiple tracks. Heading northeast toward target area. Rodriguez's voice came back immediately. Copy midnight. Intelligence confirms increased radio chatter in that sector. Be advised, drone coverage is now available. We show no immediate contacts in your area. The knowledge that friendly eyes were watching from above provided some comfort, but Sarah knew that drones had limitations. They could spot large groups or vehicles, but a single person moving carefully could remain undetected. The same was true for small groups of hidden soldiers. She continued deeper into the desert, following Amir's route through a series of low hills that provided some concealment from observation. The terrain gradually became more rocky, with scattered boulders and dry streambed that created a maze of natural hiding places. This was exactly the type of area where experienced operators would go to ground when being pursued. At the third waypoint, Sarah found what she was looking for. Hidden behind a cluster of rocks was a small depression that Amir had marked as a traditional rest stop for desert travelers. More importantly, it was also marked as a location with a reliable underground spring. As she approached, she noticed something that made her heart race. There, pressed into the soft sand near the spring, was a partial boot print. The tread pattern was distinctly American military, and the size suggested it had been made by someone carrying a heavy load. Sarah examined the print carefully, noting that it appeared fresh despite the recent sandstorm. She activated her radio again. Base Alpha. This is midnight. I have possible friendly sign at waypoint 3. Requesting permission to investigate further. Copy midnight. You're authorized to proceed, but maintain communications protocol. Check in every 15 minutes. Sarah began a careful search of the area around the spring. What she found told a story that filled her with both hope and concern. There were multiple boot prints, all consistent with American military footwear. She could also see signs that someone had attempted to camouflage their presence, using rocks and brush to cover disturbed sand. Most telling was what she found near a large boulder that would provide cover from observation. Scratched into the rock were 4 barely visible marks that would be meaningless to most people. But Sarah recognized them immediately as escape and evasion symbols used by Special Operations Forces to communicate with potential rescuers. The symbols indicated that 6 personnel were alive and mobile, that they had medical supplies, and that they were moving toward higher ground to the northeast. The final symbol was a small arrow, pointing toward a cluster of hills visible in the distance. Sarah felt a surge of hope mixed with urgency. Team Bravo was alive, and apparently uninjured enough to be moving on their own. But the fact that they were heading toward the hills meant they were also moving deeper into enemy-controlled territory. She was preparing to continue her pursuit when she heard something that made her freeze in place. The sound was faint but unmistakable. The distant rumble of multiple vehicles approaching from the south. Sarah quickly moved to a position where she could observe the area while remaining hidden. Through her night vision equipment, she could see headlights moving across the desert in her direction. As the vehicles got closer, she counted 8 pickup trucks moving in a spread formation. Each truck carried several armed men, and at least 3 of the vehicles had heavy weapons mounted in their beds. Sarah realized she was watching a major search operation. The enemy forces were conducting a systematic sweep of the area, checking every possible hiding place where the missing SEALs might have taken shelter. Worse, they were moving along the same route that Team Bravo appeared to have taken toward the hills. She keyed her radio, speaking as quietly as possible. Base Alpha. This is midnight. I have 8 enemy vehicles conducting search operations. They're moving northeast toward the hills, same direction as our package. Copy, midnight. Can you maintain visual on the enemy force? Sarah watched as the vehicles spread out, their headlights sweeping across the landscape like searchlights. They were being thorough and methodical, and they clearly knew the terrain well. This wasn't a random patrol, it was a coordinated hunt. Negative, Sarah replied. They're moving too fast, and I can't risk being spotted. but they're definitely tracking our people. As the enemy vehicles disappeared into the distance, Sarah faced a critical decision. She could continue following Team Bravo's trail, but that would put her directly into the path of the search party. Alternatively, she could try to get ahead of both groups by taking one of Amir's alternative routes through the hills. She studied her map carefully, weighing the options. The alternative route was longer and more difficult, requiring her to climb through rocky terrain that would be treacherous in the dark. But it would also take her to higher ground where she might be able to observe both the seals and their pursuers without being detected. Sarah made her choice and began climbing toward the hills. The going was immediately more difficult, with loose rocks that threatened to shift under her feet and create noise that could be heard for miles in the still desert air. She was forced to move slowly, testing each step carefully and stopping frequently to listen for signs of pursuit. As she climbed, she could see the lights of the enemy vehicles moving through the valley below. They had reached the spring where she had found the boot prints and were now conducting a detailed search of the area. Sarah could only hope that Team Bravo had done a good enough job of concealing their signs that the enemy wouldn't be able to determine their direction of travel. After an hour of difficult climbing, Sarah reached a ridge that provided an excellent view of the surrounding area. She set up her observation post behind a large rock formation and began scanning the landscape with her night vision equipment. What she saw in the valley below made her blood run cold. The enemy forces had found Team Bravo's trail and were now moving systematically through the hills, checking every possible hiding place. They had also brought in reinforcements. Sarah could count at least 12 vehicles now, along with what appeared to be a helicopter circling overhead with a searchlight. But then she saw something that gave her hope. On a distant ridge, barely visible even with her night vision equipment, she caught a brief flash of light. It was there for only a second before disappearing, but the pattern was unmistakable. 3 short flashes, 3 long flashes, 3 short flashes, SOS in Morse code. Team Bravo was alive, and they were calling for help. Sarah calculated the distance to the signal location. It was approximately 2 miles away, across difficult terrain that was now crawling with enemy forces. Getting there would require all of her skill and training, plus a considerable amount of luck. She activated her radio and made a decision that would change the course of the entire operation. Base Alpha, this is Midnight. I have visual contact with our package. They're alive and signaling for help. I'm going in. Rodriguez's voice came back immediately, filled with concern. Midnight, that's negative. You're outnumbered at least 50 to 1. Return to base immediately. Sir, they don't have time. The enemy is closing in on their position. If I don't reach them in the next 2 hours, they're going to be captured or killed. There was a long pause before Rodriguez responded. Midnight, you're not authorized to engage in direct combat operations. Your mission is reconnaissance only. Sarah looked out at the distant ridge where 6 brave men were making their last stand against overwhelming odds. She thought about their families, their children, their hopes and dreams that would die with them in this god-awful desert if someone didn't take action. Base Alpha, I'm experiencing radio difficulties, she said, knowing that her next words would end her military career if she survived the night. I may be out of contact for an extended period. Before Rodriguez could respond, Sarah switched off her radio and began moving down the ridge toward the enemy forces below. She had 4 hours of darkness left, 2 miles of hostile territory to cross, and approximately 50 armed enemies standing between her and the men she was determined to save. The desert stretched out before her like an alien landscape, filled with danger and uncertainty. But Sarah Mitchell had made her choice, and there was no turning back now. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, 6 Navy SEALs were waiting for a miracle. She intended to be that miracle. As Sarah moved through the shadows toward the enemy positions, she began to understand why the local people considered this part of the desert to be haunted. The rocks seemed to whisper in the wind, and every shadow could conceal either salvation or death. But she had trained for moments like this, and she carried within her all the skills and determination that years of military service had developed. The clock was ticking, the enemy was closing in, and the lives of 6 good men hung in the balance. Sarah Mitchell disappeared into the desert night, moving like a ghost toward what might be the most important mission of her life. Sarah moved through the darkness like a shadow among shadows, every step calculated to avoid detection by the enemy forces that now surrounded the hills. The terrain worked in her favor, providing countless hiding spots among the rocks and boulders, but it also concealed the positions of hostile fighters who could appear without warning. She had been moving toward Team Bravo's position for over an hour when she encountered her first enemy patrol. 3 armed men were making their way along a narrow trail that cut through the hills, their weapons ready and their movements coordinated. Sarah pressed herself against a large boulder and waited as they passed within 10 feet of her hiding position. Through her night vision equipment, she could see that these weren't ordinary soldiers. They moved with the confidence and discipline of experienced fighters, checking their surroundings carefully and communicating with hand signals. Their equipment was modern and well-maintained, suggesting they were part of an elite unit rather than common militants. After the patrol disappeared into the darkness, Sarah continued her approach toward the ridge where she had seen the SOS signal. The enemy forces were conducting a systematic search pattern, gradually tightening their circle around Team Bravo's position. Sarah estimated that the SEALs had perhaps 2 hours before they would be completely surrounded with no possibility of escape. As she climbed higher into the hills, Sarah could hear radio chatter from the enemy forces. Her knowledge of the local language allowed her to understand their communications, and what she heard filled her with both urgency and tactical information that could prove vital. The enemy commander was coordinating the search from a command post located on a hill approximately 1 mile south of Team Bravo's position. He had divided his forces into 4 groups, each approaching the target area from a different direction. The plan was to close the circle at dawn, using helicopter support and heavy weapons to eliminate any resistance. More importantly, Sarah learned that the enemy had intercepted some of Team Bravo's communications and knew approximately where they were hiding. The only reason the SEALs hadn't been captured yet was that the enemy commander wanted to take them alive for intelligence purposes. This gave her both an opportunity and a deadly complication. Sarah reached a position about 500 meters from where she had seen the SOS signal and began a careful reconnaissance of the area. Through her night vision equipment, she could see movement among the rocks on the target ridge. The positioning was expertly chosen. Team Bravo had selected a defensive position that provided excellent fields of fire while offering multiple escape routes. She activated her tactical radio on a special frequency that only special operations forces would monitor. Speaking barely above a whisper, she said, "Team Bravo, this is Midnight Angel. If you can hear this transmission, flash your position once." For several tense seconds, nothing happened. Then, from a cluster of rocks on the ridge, she saw a single brief flash of infrared light that would be invisible to anyone not using night vision equipment. Sarah's heart pounded as she realized she had made contact. "Team Bravo, this is Captain Mitchell from FOB Alpha. I am approximately 500 meters southeast of your position. Enemy forces are converging on your location with plans to surround you at dawn. I am here to get you out." Another brief flash acknowledged her message. Then, barely audible over the radio, she heard Tank Thompson's voice. "Midnight Angel. This is Team Bravo Actual. We have 1 injured, limited ammunition, and no water. Enemy forces have been probing our position for the past 2 hours. Copy, Team Bravo. What's the nature of the injury?" "Rodriguez took shrapnel in his leg when we were first compromised. Williams has been treating him, but he needs medical attention soon." Sarah processed this information quickly. Alex Rodriguez was injured, which would complicate any movement. But the fact that Marcus Williams was treating him meant the team still had their medic and medical supplies. "Team Bravo, I have an extraction route mapped out, but we need to move within the next hour. Enemy forces are planning to close the circle at dawn." "Negative, Midnight Angel. We won't abandon our position unless we know you have a solid plan. Too much risk of walking into an ambush." Sarah understood Tank's caution. As team leader, he was responsible for the lives of 5 other men, and moving to an unknown extraction point in darkness could easily lead them into a trap. She needed to provide specific details that would convince him she had a viable escape plan. "Team Bravo, I have detailed knowledge of traditional smuggling routes through this area. There's a wadi approximately 1 click north of your position that leads to a series of caves. From there, we can reach an extraction point where friendly forces can pick us up. How do we know you're really who you say you are? Sarah smiled despite the tension of the situation. Tank was following proper security protocols even in these desperate circumstances. Team leader's call sign is Tank, your medic is Williams, and your demo guy goes by Morrison. Your last successful mission was hitting that IED factory 3 months ago, where you found enough explosives to level half of Baghdad. There was a pause before Tank's voice came back over the radio. That's good enough for me. What's the plan? Sarah studied her map and the enemy positions she had observed. The wadi I mentioned runs parallel to the main search pattern. If we can reach it without being detected, we can move north under cover until we're outside the search perimeter. What about Rodriguez? He can walk, but not far, and not fast. Sarah had already considered this complication. We'll need to carry him for some sections. It's going to be slow going, but it's better than staying here and fighting off 50 hostiles at sunrise. As Sarah finalized the extraction plan, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. Helicopter rotors were approaching from the south, and the aircraft was using a searchlight to illuminate the ground below. Team Bravo, we have immediate problems. Enemy helicopter inbound with searchlight. You need to prepare to move now. Through her night vision equipment, Sarah could see the helicopter's searchlight sweeping across the hills in a methodical pattern. It was moving toward Team Bravo's position, and once it illuminated their hiding spot, the ground forces would have a precise target for their attack. Sarah made a decision that went against every tactical principle she had ever learned. Instead of remaining hidden, she began moving toward Team Bravo's position across open ground that would expose her to observation by both the helicopter and ground forces. Team Bravo, I'm coming to your position. Be ready to move in 60 seconds. Negative, Midnight Angel. Too much risk. The helicopter will spot you. I'm counting on it, Sarah replied, pulling out 2 smoke grenades from her pack. Sarah's plan was desperate but potentially effective. If she could create enough confusion and misdirection, she might be able to draw the helicopter and some of the ground forces away from Team Bravo's position long enough for them to begin their escape. She reached a rocky outcropping approximately 200 meters from Team Bravo and pulled the pins on both smoke grenades, throwing them in different directions. The grenades created thick clouds of colored smoke that would be visible to the helicopter's thermal imaging equipment. The reaction was immediate. The helicopter changed course and began moving toward the smoke clouds, its searchlight probing the area where Sarah had thrown the grenades. She could hear excited radio chatter from the enemy forces as they redirected their search efforts toward the false targets. Using the distraction, Sarah sprinted across the remaining distance to Team Bravo's position. She found the 6 SEALs positioned among the rocks exactly as she had expected, with overlapping fields of fire and excellent concealment. Despite their desperate situation, they had maintained proper tactical discipline. Tank Thompson was exactly as she had imagined him, a large, powerful man with intelligent eyes and an air of calm authority that inspired confidence even in the most dangerous situations. The other team members were positioned around him, each covering a different approach to their defensive position. Alex Rodriguez was sitting with his back against a rock, his left leg wrapped in field dressings that showed dark stains even in the green glow of night vision equipment. Despite his injury, he was alert and holding his weapon ready. Captain Mitchell, Tank said quietly. I have to admit, I didn't think anyone was crazy enough to come out here alone. I had good motivation, Sarah replied, studying the layout of their position. How long since Rodriguez was hit? About 6 hours, Marcus Williams, the team medic, answered. The bleeding is controlled, but he's lost some blood, and the wound could become infected if we don't get him to proper medical care soon. Sarah checked her watch. They had less than 3 hours until dawn, and the enemy forces were already beginning to tighten their circle. The smoke grenades had bought them perhaps 15 minutes, but soon the helicopter would resume its systematic search pattern. Here's the plan, Sarah said, spreading her map on the ground. We move in single file toward this wadi. Approximately 1 click north, the terrain will provide concealment from the helicopter, and it's outside the current search pattern. What about Rodriguez? Tank asked. Williams and I will help him for the difficult sections. Morrison and Chen will take point and watch for enemy patrols. Jackson will cover R6. Tank studied the map carefully, his years of experience evident in the way he analyzed the route and potential complications. It's risky, but it's better than staying here. When do we move? Now. The movement began immediately, with Morrison and Chen disappearing into the darkness ahead, while Jackson took up position to cover their retreat. Sarah and Williams helped Rodriguez to his feet, and despite his injury, the young SEAL was able to move under his own power with assistance. The first part of the journey was the most dangerous, requiring them to cross open ground that could be observed from several enemy positions. They moved in short rushes, with each team member covering the others as they advanced from one concealed position to another. Sarah's knowledge of the terrain proved invaluable as she led them along paths that weren't visible on any military map but had been used by smugglers and nomads for generations. These ancient routes took advantage of natural features that provided concealment while avoiding the areas where enemy forces were most likely to establish checkpoints. They had covered approximately half the distance to the wadi when Morrison's voice came over the radio. Movement ahead. At least 4 personnel on the ridgeline, approximately 200 meters north. Sarah studied the terrain ahead and realized they had encountered one of the enemy blocking positions she had observed earlier. The hostile forces were positioned exactly where they needed to pass to reach the wadi. "Can we go around?" Tank asked. Sarah checked her map again. "Negative. Any alternate route would take us through areas where we'd be exposed to helicopter observation." Tank considered their options for several seconds, before making a decision that demonstrated why he was trusted with command of special operations missions. "We go through them." "Sir?" Morrison's voice came over the radio. 4 targets, 6 shooters, and the element of surprise. Tank explained quietly. "We hit them fast and silent, then continue to the extraction point, before anyone realizes what happened." Sarah understood the logic, but she also knew that any gunfire would bring the helicopter and possibly other enemy forces to their location. "What about noise discipline?" Tank smiled grimly and pulled out a knife. "This is what knives are for." The attack was planned and executed with the precision that made Navy SEALs legendary. Morrison and Chen approached the enemy position from 2 different angles, while the others provided overwatch. The engagement lasted less than 30 seconds and resulted in 4 enemy fighters eliminated without a single shot being fired. With the immediate threat neutralized, Team Bravo continued toward the wadi. Rodriguez was weakening from blood loss and the exertion of movement, but he continued without complaint. Supported by Sarah and Williams, they reached the wadi just as the helicopter returned to their area and began searching the ridge where they had been hiding. Sarah could hear the radio chatter as the enemy forces discovered the bodies of the 4 fighters and realized that their targets had broken out of the containment area. The wadi provided excellent concealment, but the rocky bottom made movement difficult and noisy. They were forced to move slowly to avoid creating sounds that could be heard by the search teams that were now frantically trying to re-establish contact. After 45 minutes of careful movement through the wadi, Sarah led them to a series of caves that Amir had marked on his map as traditional shelters used by desert travelers. The caves were deep enough to provide concealment from both visual and thermal observation, and they had multiple entrances that would allow for quick escape if discovered. "This is our rally point," Sarah announced as they settled into the largest cave. "I need to contact base and arrange for extraction." She activated her satellite radio and established contact with FOB Alpha. Rodriguez's voice came through immediately. "Midnight, where the hell are you? We've been monitoring enemy radio traffic, and they're going crazy looking for someone." "Base Alpha, this is Midnight. I have all 6 packages, 1 injured but mobile. Request immediate extraction from Grid Square, Quebec 4. There was a pause before Rodriguez replied. "Midnight, that grid is still inside the search perimeter. We can't get aircraft in there safely." Sarah checked her map and found an alternative location that might work. "What about Grid Square Romeo 6? That's outside the search area and has suitable terrain for helicopter landing." "Romeo 6 is feasible, but you'll need to get there on your own. We can have extraction assets in position in 2 hours." Sarah looked at Rodriguez, who was pale and obviously in pain despite his efforts to hide it. 2 hours of additional movement might be more than he could handle. Tank must have been thinking the same thing. "Can you buy us some additional time?" he asked. Sarah considered the situation. The enemy forces were still focused on the area where they had last been seen, but it wouldn't be long before they expanded their search pattern. However, if she could create another distraction, it might draw attention away from their route to the extraction point. "I have an idea," she said, pulling out her remaining smoke grenades and flares. "I'm going to create some noise and confusion about 2 clicks south of here. That should draw most of the search teams away from our extraction route." "That's a suicide mission," Tank said bluntly. "Not if I do it right. I know this terrain better than they do, and I have escape routes planned." Before anyone could object, Sarah was moving toward the cave entrance. "Get Rodriguez to the extraction point. I'll meet you there in 90 minutes. Sarah disappeared into the darkness, leaving Team Bravo with detailed directions to the extraction point and a promise that she would rejoin them before the helicopter arrived. As she moved through the desert toward the enemy positions, she couldn't help but think about how much her life had changed in the past 6 hours. When the sun rose, she would either be dead, captured, or on her way back to base with 6 rescued Navy SEALs. But whatever happened, she knew she had made the right choice. Some missions were worth any risk, and saving the lives of good soldiers was definitely one of them. The desert dawn was still 2 hours away, but Sarah Mitchell was already planning her final gambit in a deadly game of hide-and-seek that would determine whether 7 American soldiers made it home alive.